I want you to picture someone very specific in your life right now. Like, really think about the person you know who just absolutely embodies stability.
Oh, you mean the type of person who always has their email inbox at zero?
Yes, exactly. The
Yeah.
inbox zero people.
Mhm.
Or, the neighbor whose lawn is cut to the exact millimeter every single Saturday.
Right, or the friend who pays their taxes in February and just never, ever loses their temper in traffic.
Exactly. These are the people we generally consider to be, well, the foundational pillars of our society. They are entirely rational.
Very well
They're
adjusted.
deeply well adjusted.
Yeah.
They're the ones we inherently rely on to keep the massive, invisible wheels of the modern world turning without a hitch.
The adults in the room, basically.
Right, the adults in the room. Now, I want you to imagine a scenario where being that exact kind of person, a productive, sane, entirely predictable, and conforming member of society, was actually a terminal diagnosis.
Is a profoundly unsettling thought experiment, honestly. Primarily because it just completely violates our evolutionary and social conditioning.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, we are taught from childhood that rationality, emotional regulation, and societal stability are our ultimate survival
We're
mechanisms.
told that's how you win at life.
Exactly. We operate on this foundational belief that when a crisis hits, it is the calm, collected, and highly organized individuals who will navigate the storm and ultimately inherit the earth.
Right, the adults in the room are supposed to save us. But today, we are diving deep into a world that takes that core assumption, flips it entirely upside down, and then basically sets it on fire.
Which is always a fun place to start.
It really is. We are exploring a fascinating, deeply uncomfortable, and darkly satirical post-apocalyptic universe created in 1966 by the British author Edmund Cooper.
And the novel is called All Fool's Day, or, as it's known in its highly acclaimed French translation, Le Jour des Fous.
And our mission for this deep dive is not to just, recount the plot of a vintage science fiction story.
No, definitely not.
We are going to dissect this uniquely bleak, cynical entry into the post-apocalyptic genre because it forces us to confront some incredibly raw questions.
Questions about conformity, mostly.
Yeah, the suffocating nature of conformity, the strange biological mechanics of trauma, and why the boundary line between what we call normal and what we diagnose as pathological might be so thin it's practically translucent.
Which is exactly why this narrative remains so potent even decades after it was written. I mean, Cooper isn't interested in simply destroying the physical bridges and buildings of the world.
He goes after the mind.
He is executing a targeted demolition of our psychological hierarchy. He's asking what happens when the universe decides that our definition of sanity is actually a fatal flaw.
I love how you phrase that, a targeted demolition, because the apocalypse in All Fool's Day doesn't start with, like, a cinematic explosion.
No meteorites, no aliens.
Right. There are no nuclear sirens screaming across London. There isn't a massive, fiery asteroid blotting out the sun. The end of the world arrives on a Tuesday, essentially.
It's just a totally normal day.
Yeah. It begins on July 7th, 1971, and the weather is absolutely gorgeous.
The contrast there is so vital to the psychological horror of the premise. Cooper paints this picture of a quintessential, idyllic English summer day.
Perfect picnic weather.
Exactly.
Oh,
It is warm, it is pleasant, the sky is clear. If you're walking down the street, everything would look perfectly, completely normal.
No external threat at all.
None. The infrastructure is entirely intact. The catalyst for human extinction is silent, invisible, and completely unnoticed by the population as they go about their morning commutes.
The trigger is just its sunspots. Strange new spots appear on the sun, and they start bathing the Earth through this entirely new, unprecedented form of radiation.
Which is where we have to ask the audience to suspend their disbelief a bit,
Oh, for sure. Any astrophysicist listening right now is already throwing their hands up.
yelling at their speakers.
Yeah. We know that solar radiation does not selectively alter human neurochemistry to cause mass despair. Scientifically, it's completely bogus. It is pure, unabashed, soft sci-fi.
It really is.
But what's brilliant is that the physics simply do not matter here. The radiation is just a vehicle.
Right, because when this invisible wave hits the planet, it doesn't cause physical burns. It doesn't cause radiation sickness or make your hair fall out.
It bypasses the body entirely.
Exactly. It bypasses the body entirely and attacks the human mind, triggering a phenomenon that is referred to in the text as radiant suicide.
And the phrase itself, radiant suicide, is just chilling.
It is, precisely because it pairs a word associated with light, warmth, and energy with, well, the ultimate act of self-destruction.
And the demographic data of this catastrophe that he lays out is staggering. Within just 7 years of that beautiful July morning, by 1978, over 8 million people in Britain alone are dead.
8 million.
But they aren't dying from failing organs or physical decay. They are being consumed by an overwhelming, completely irresistible psychological compulsion to end their own lives.
And here is the truly terrifying hook of the novel. It isn't random.
Not at all.
The radiation doesn't just hit people based on geography or genetics. It acts as an incredibly specific, horrific psychological filter.
It actively targets the stable minds.
Yes. The more grounded you are, the more well-adjusted you are, the more you fit perfectly into the conventional mold of society, the faster the radiation compels you to jump off a bridge.
It is the absolute inversion of natural selection.
It really is. In any other biological model, adaptation to one's environment is the key to survival. The people who have adapted best to the modern, civilized environment are the ones who thrive.
But Cooper introduces a cosmic variable that punishes that exact adaptation.
He does. The casualties are incredibly specific. It's the bank clerks, the accountants, the meticulously organized managers.
The shopkeepers who open their doors at exactly 8:00 a.m. every single day.
Even the esteemed, highly rational professors at Oxford and Cambridge. The entire structural foundation of a functioning civilized society is systematically compelled to destroy itself.
Okay, wait. I need to pause on this concept you mentioned earlier in our research notes. You called this an ambitopian premise.
Yes, ambidope.
I am super familiar with utopian stories where everything is perfect and dystopian stories where everything is a total nightmare. But what exactly makes this ambi?
It's a great question.
Like, how does a world where 8 million accountants kill themselves fit into that?
That is a fantastic distinction to draw. So ambitopian comes from the prefix ambi, meaning both, or having dual characteristics.
Like ambidextrous.
Exactly. It implies a setting that is simultaneously a utopia and a dystopia, entirely depending on your psychological vantage point.
Oh, I see.
For the bank clerks, the professors, and the people who thrive on predictable order, this world is obviously the ultimate dystopia. Their internal reality collapses, resulting in mass death.
The worst case scenario.
But for a very specific subset of the population, the marginalized, the chaotic, the outcasts, the sudden removal of all societal rules, expectations, and normal people might look remarkably like a utopia.
Because the pressure is gone.
Exactly. The universe has enacted a cosmic judgment. It is actively punishing those who worship the mundane, those who find their ultimate meaning in supermarket aisles and office hierarchies.
A fatal allergy to the mundane. That is wild. It really makes you think about how much of our own sanity is just a performance to keep our jobs.
That's a very uncomfortable thought.
So if the cosmic filter deletes the normal people, who exactly inherits the Earth? The sources say the survivors are labeled the transnormals.
Yes, the transnormals.
And this group is just as hyper-specific as the victims. It's the creative artists, the eccentrics, the people society already labeled as madmen or fanatics.
Actors, dancers, prostitutes, sadists, masochists.
Even people with a deeply pathological, obsessive love for animals. Basically, anyone whose brain was already completely incompatible with a 9-to-5 cubicle job.
Which forces us to critically evaluate what we actually mean when we use the word normalcy.
Right.
Cooper is proposing something deeply subversive here. He's suggesting that normality is not an objective state of neurological health.
Oh.
Rather, it is a fragile, heavily constructed, and perhaps even inherently pathological state in itself.
So being normal is the real sickness.
That's his argument. He is suggesting that to be a perfectly functioning cog in a modern bureaucratic machine requires a level of collective delusion. You have to suppress your natural human chaos in exchange for the illusion of safety and routine.
And under the pressure of this cosmic radiation, that collective delusion shatters.
Exactly. The transnormals survive because they were already living outside that delusion. Their minds were already chaotic, alienated, and adapted to existing on the absolute fringes of the neat, tidy boxes that the accountants had constructed.
They had pre-existing immunity to the collapse of order because order never worked for them in the first place.
Previously.
I really see why Cooper had to use the fake science of psychic sunspots now.
Oh, it was a very conscious choice.
Because if he had written a story about a highly contagious virus or a massive asteroid strike, the narrative would inevitably get bogged down in the physical logistics of survival.
Right, the mechanics of it all.
The characters would be arguing about how to filter drinking water or synthesize antibiotics or dig through rubble. The conflict would just be humanity versus nature.
Which is a totally different genre.
Yeah, but by using this entirely impossible radiation that only attacks the concept of conformity, He completely bypasses the physical apocalypse.
It is a brilliant, necessary literary scalpel. The infrastructure of the world is left entirely untouched. The high-rises are still standing.
The cars are fully fueled and parked on the streets.
The supermarkets are still fully stocked with canned goods. The destruction is exclusively internal and sociological.
So he clears the board.
Yes, he is isolating his variables perfectly. He is conducting a philosophical experiment. If you instantly vaporize the mental scaffolding of civilization, the laws, the manners, the behavioral expectations, but you leave the physical playground completely intact, what does the human animal actually revert to?
All the sensible people are gone, the cities are intact but empty, and the asylum doors have been thrown wide open.
That's the setup.
Before we meet the specific inmates who are taking over, I feel like we need to understand the architect of this weirdly silent apocalypse. Because Edmund Cooper wasn't just, pulling these ideas out of thin air.
No, he was very embedded in the genre.
He was writing within a very specific and, frankly, very polite British literary tradition, and he decided to absolutely torch it.
He really did. Edmund Cooper is a highly compelling figure in the landscape of 20th century British science fiction. He was born in 1926, and crucially, for a massive portion of his career from 1967 all the way until his death in 1982, he served as a prominent, highly influential science fiction reviewer.
For the Sunday Times, right?
Yes, for the Sunday Times. This meant he possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the genre's mechanics. He spent his weeks analyzing, critiquing, and deconstructing the exact tropes that his peers were relying on.
So he knew exactly what the rules were, which meant he knew exactly how to break them for maximum effect.
Exactly. And the primary rule book he decided to rewrite in All Fool's Day was the tradition of the English disaster novel, most famously championed by writers like John Wyndham.
Who wrote The Day of the Triffids.
Correct. And this subgenre is often referred to by critics with a very specific, almost contradictory term: the cozy catastrophe.
The cozy catastrophe. I have to say, that sounds like an incredibly niche subgenre of YouTube vlogs where people drink chamomile tea while complaining about minor inconveniences.
It does have that ring to it.
Like, what exactly defines a catastrophe as cozy? Because billions of people dying doesn't naturally evoke the feeling of a warm blanket.
It is a brilliantly sardonic term, originally coined by the science fiction author and critic Brian Aldiss. He used it to describe a uniquely British approach to the end of the world.
Okay, lay it out for me.
In a classic cozy catastrophe, the global population might be decimated by plagues, aliens, or, in Wyndham's case, giant walking plants and mass blindness. But the narrative lens is incredibly, stubbornly tight. It focuses entirely on a small, usually middle-class, highly polite group of English survivors.
So they aren't fighting in the mud.
Not at all. They witness the fall of humanity, but they generally manage to secure a lovely country manor house. They find an endless supply of high-quality canned goods, they ensure the sherry is well-stocked, and they spend their evenings having civilized debates about how to rationally rebuild a polite, democratic society.
Unbelievable.
The sheer visceral horror, the blood, the starvation, it all happens off stage. It's an apocalypse experience through a filter of stiff upper lips and rigid class manners.
Right. It's the end of the world, but God forbid we miss afternoon tea.
Exactly.
It's like booking a luxury glamping pod in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are intellectually aware that a mile away, houses are being torn to shreds, but your pod is soundproof. You have a portable espresso maker, and your biggest concern is whether the Wi-Fi will hold out so you can read the news about the destruction.
It's comfortable survivalism.
But Cooper looks at that entire concept and just laughs, doesn't he?
He does more than laugh. He actively dismantles it with a corrosive level of cynicism.
Yeah, he takes a sledgehammer to the glamping pod.
He uses the exact structural framework of the cozy catastrophe we have, our solitary English survivor navigating a depopulated London. But he injects it with a deeply pessimistic view of human psychology.
He's not buying the polite manor house idea.
He completely rejects the idea that if you strip away the police and the government, middle-class people will just naturally form a polite, democratic village council.
Yeah, if Wyndham's characters are glamping during a hurricane, Cooper's protagonist is locked in a subterranean bunker with a highly volatile experimental theater troupe, 3 doomsday cult leaders, and no sedatives.
It's a madhouse.
There is absolutely nothing polite about the society that is left behind. And it's fascinating because the heavyweights of the genre immediately recognized what Cooper was doing.
Oh, they notice.
J.G. Ballard, who is basically the undisputed king of psychological breakdown in science fiction, openly praised All Fool's Day.
High praise indeed.
He specifically pointed out how wittily and cleverly Cooper envisioned this chaotic world, especially his inclusion of bizarre religious sects and these terrifying groups obsessed with mental hygiene.
When a writer of J.G. Ballard's caliber, a man whose entire literary career was dedicated to exploring the violent, sexual, and psychological disintegration of modern humans, praises your depiction of societal collapse, it is a massive validation of your dark vision.
It means you've hit a nerve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ballard understood that Cooper wasn't just writing an adventure story, he was holding up a distorted mirror to the 1960s. He was telling his contemporaries, you actually believe that without laws we remain civilized. No. Without laws, the survivors will immediately construct violent, irrational shrines to their own deepest neuroses.
So the normal people have willingly jumped off the cliffs, the eccentrics have inherited the empty cities, and we have an author who is actively mocking the idea of a polite apocalypse.
That sets the stage perfectly.
To really feel the weight of this, we need to meet our tour guide through this madness. Because Cooper doesn't give us a noble scientist or a brave soldier to lead us, he gives us Matthew Greville.
Yes, Matthew Greville.
A man who perfectly embodies the damage required to survive this new world.
Greville is a fascinating study in psychological survival. Before the sunspots appeared and the world ended, Greville was an advertising executive in London.
Which is very telling.
It is not a coincidence. An ad executive is someone whose entire profession is built on the manipulation of desire, the twisting of perception, and the conscious construction of a false reality to sell a product.
They sell illusions.
Exactly. His career already required a profound detachment from objective, grounded truth. But when we actually meet him in the narrative, the world has long since ended and he is not pitching ad campaigns.
No, he's basically a hermit.
He is living an incredibly solitary, isolated existence, barricaded inside a heavily fortified hideout in the middle of a dead city.
And he's not just, barricading the door against the chaos outside. He has built a fortress to hide from his own brain.
That is the crucial point.
Greville's backstory is the emotional core of the entire premise. He didn't survive the Radiant suicide because he was a brilliant visionary or a misunderstood artist. He survived because he was already psychologically shattered.
Completely shattered.
Years before the first sunspot ever appeared, Greville was driving a car over Chelsea Bridge in London. There was a horrific accident, and his wife, Pauline, was killed.
And the narrative layers this tragedy with a crushing, suffocating ambiguity. It wasn't merely a freak accident where they were hit by a drunk driver. Greville was at the wheel. He caused the crash.
He was responsible.
Furthermore, the text heavily implies, and Greville himself tortuously suspects, that on some dark, subconscious level, he may have intended to cause it.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly dark.
It is. He is a man who is utterly consumed, practically paralyzed, by an unimaginably heavy burden of guilt and potential culpability. His grief isn't a clean, noble sadness. It is a rotting, festering wound of self-hatred.
So let's break down the mechanics of that survival. When the invisible radiation starts sweeping across England, telling every sane, happy, well-adjusted person that existence is futile and they need to end it, the radiation hits Greville and finds absolutely no purchase.
None at all.
His brain chemistry is already so fundamentally altered by his trauma. I mean, if we look at this through a modern psychological lens, we know that extreme, unresolved trauma permanently alters a person's baseline for stress.
It physically changes the brain.
Right. Their cortisol levels, their hypervigilance, it physically rewires the neural pathways. Greville is already living in a state of constant internal psychological apocalypse.
He's used to the end of the world.
Exactly. He is so far removed from what we would define as normality that the cosmic filter simply ignores him.
Which presents the central, incredibly dark irony of Cooper's universe. In almost all survival literature, living through the disaster is framed as a reward.
You survived because you earned it.
Right. You survived because you were prepared, or because you were morally virtuous, or physically strong, or exceptionally intelligent. But in All Fool's Day, survival is an exclusive reservation for the broken.
Wow.
Greville's profound psychological damage is his absolute shield. If he had been a loving, happy, perfectly adjusted husband, he would have walked into the Thames along with the 8 million other normal citizens.
That's a staggering thought.
The very guilt that makes his life a living hell is the only reason he still has a life at all.
But this brings up a massive issue for me as a reader. Like, I completely understand the philosophical point Cooper is making, but from a storytelling perspective, it is a huge
That's a
risk.
massive gamble.
You look at what the literary critics have said about Greville, they describe him as a deeply unlovable central character. They flat out call him a selfish idiot.
And it's an accurate description.
It really is. He sits in his bunker, completely indifferent to the fact that human civilization has evaporated. He doesn't care about the millions of people who died. He is entirely self-absorbed in his own misery.
He's not a hero.
Not even close. So if I'm reading a book about a cynical, selfish guy who might have purposely driven his wife into a fatal car crash and who doesn't care about anything, why do I keep turning the pages? How does Cooper prevent the reader from just hoping Greville gets eaten by a pack of wild dogs in Chapter 2?
It is a phenomenal risk, and it speaks to Cooper's confidence in his premise. Traditional storytelling dogma dictates that we must have an aspirational protagonist, someone we can project onto, someone we root for to overcome the odds.
We want a good guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Greville is aggressively non-aspirational, but Cooper swaps out likability for a raw, morbid psychological intrigue. We may be repulsed by Greville's selfishness, but we are captivated by the sheer, unvarnished honesty of his state.
Like watching a car crash, pardon the pun.
Right. We are watching a man who is a walking open wound navigating a graveyard. He keeps the reader invested by leaning entirely into the gritty realism of deep apathy.
Which makes sense, contextually.
Think about it. If you were truly drowning in the level of soul-crushing guilt that Greville is experiencing, would you genuinely care if the Postal Service collapsed or the government dissolved?
Of course not. You wouldn't even notice.
Right. Cooper forces us to sit in the extreme discomfort of watching a protagonist who doesn't care about saving the world, simply because his own personal world had already violently ended on Chelsea Bridge years before the sky changed.
It's the ultimate voyeurism. We are watching a deeply personal, internal train wreck happening inside the shell of a massive global train wreck.
That's beautifully put.
It's fascinating, but also you really can't sustain a whole novel just watching a depressed guy eat canned beans and stare at a wall in London.
No, the plot has to move.
Something has to force him to move. And just as Greville seems perfectly content to simply rot away in his fortified apartment until he dies of old age, the entire narrative violently shifts gears.
It really does.
It moves away from this cynical, solitary survivalism and forces an incredibly unexpected, high-stakes moment of human connection.
And the catalyst for this shift is a compulsion. Greville decides he must leave his sanctuary, not to scavenge for food or weapons, but to go on a dark pilgrimage.
He goes back to the bridge.
He returns to the exact physical epicenter of his trauma, Chelsea Bridge. He needs to physically stand where Pauline died.
Just torturing himself.
It is a classic manifestation of unresolved trauma, the irresistible need to continually touch the hottest part of the stove. But it is precisely there, at the site of his greatest past failure, that the terrifying reality of the new world abruptly crashes into him.
While he's standing on the bridge, lost in his guilt, he realizes he isn't alone. He encounters a young woman named Liz.
And Liz is not having a quiet, reflective moment.
No. She is in a desperate, immediate fight for her life. She's being actively hunted across the bridge by a pack of feral dogs.
Feral domestic dogs, which is even creepier.
Yeah, these aren't wild wolves. These are the former domestic pets of the millions of dead Londoners. Now they're starving, traumatized themselves, and highly dangerous.
A very grim detail.
So Greville actually snaps out of his apathy long enough to intervene. He uses his weapon, saves her life, and brings her back to his hideout. And that's when he learns that her experience of the apocalypse has been vastly different and far more horrific than his quiet isolation.
Because Liz is undeniably a fellow survivor, a transnormal. But her trajectory through the ruined world has exposed her to the absolute worst atrocities of humanity's regression.
She hasn't been hiding in a nice apartment.
Not at all. When Greville finds her, she is actively fleeing from a life of brutal sexual slavery in one of the chaotic, violent encampments that have sprung up. She has seen the utter depravity that emerges when all societal laws evaporate.
But the most crucial thing about Liz is that she isn't just running away from the horror. She is running towards something entirely impossible.
Her impossible quest.
Right. Despite everything she has survived, she is consumed by a singular, manic quest. She is trying to find her twin sister, Jane.
Which is madness.
The text itself explicitly describes this search as being like searching for a needle in a haystack. It is an objectively hopeless, irrational endeavor. The country's in ruins, there are no phones, no mail, no central databases, and millions of unburied bodies.
Logistically, she will never find her.
Never.
Yet she refuses to abandon the search. And when Greville brings Liz back to his fortified hideout, the novel's pacing deliberately slows down.
It takes a breath.
We transition from the visceral action on the bridge into an intense, claustrophobic character study. These two profoundly lonely, deeply damaged individuals find themselves locked in this tiny, supposedly safe space in the center of a sprawling, dead metropolis.
Just the two of them.
And incredibly slowly, through their shared trauma and isolation, a very fragile, tentative love begins to form between them.
Which is unexpected.
Literary critics have frequently pointed to this middle section of the book and praised its profound psychological truth. Cooper completely abandons the typical action-adventure tropes of a post-apocalyptic thriller.
No more shooting mutant dogs for a while.
Right. He isn't interested in them fighting off mutants. He is interested in how two broken people learn to tolerate another presence in the room.
I was actually trying to find the right metaphor for their relationship in this bunker while prepping for the deep dive, and at first I thought, well, it's like finding a delicate flower growing in a toxic landfill.
That's a bit poetic.
Yeah, but it's too passive. It's a cliche. It's actually much more active and mechanical than that. Their relationship is more like a deep-sea ecosystem surviving at the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It is existing in a completely hostile, crushing void of darkness, and it is surviving entirely by clinging to the microscopic heat of a volcanic vent.
That is so accurate.
It isn't a beautiful romantic love story. It is a biological necessity for warmth in a universe that has gone completely cold.
That is a phenomenal, highly accurate metaphor. A deep-sea vent perfectly captures the mechanics of their survival.
Yeah.
The hideout is the pressure vessel.
Exactly.
It allows them to decompress slightly, to recognize a flicker of recognizable humanity in each other's eyes. Greville, the selfish idiot, slowly, agonizingly begins to care about the survival of a human being other than himself.
He starts to thaw out.
He starts to step outside the prison of his own guilt. And Liz, who has been hunted and abused by the worst of the survivors, finds a momentary pocket of safety where she can simply sleep without fear.
But the underlying tension of this entire middle section is built on the suffocating knowledge that the deep-sea vent is temporary. The bubble cannot last.
They can't stay down there forever.
You cannot hide in a bunker forever, especially not when one of the people in the bunker is driven by a completely irrational obsession.
She still has to find her sister.
Right. Eventually, Liz's desperate need to find her twin sister forces the issue. They have a choice. Stay in the safe, quiet dark, or open the heavy door, step out of the fortified hideout, and physically venture out into the terrifying new society that the other transnormals have been busy building while Greville was sulking.
Which initiates the third, and perhaps most sociologically disturbing, movement of the narrative.
The road trip from hell.
Greville and Liz leave the relative safety of London and begin a massive, sprawling journey across a devastated England. This section is often referred to by critics as the Wanderjahr, a grim, episodic voyage through chaos.
Wanderjahr, the wandering year.
Exactly. It is here that the reader walking alongside Greville and Liz is finally exposed to the full, unvarnished horrors that were only hinted at in Liz's backstory. This is where J.G. Ballard's praise for Cooper's twisted world-building is fully realized.
Because as they travel through the countryside and ruined towns, they encounter exactly what the madmen have built.
It isn't pretty.
They run into these groups that are described as bizarre religious sects, worshiping completely irrational dogma. They encounter extreme fundamentalists. They face violent, primitive, feudal bands where a charismatic sociopath has simply declared himself a warlord and enslaved anyone weaker than him.
The worst impulses of humanity.
And then, most terrifyingly, they encounter groups dedicated to mental hygiene.
The term mental hygiene is particularly insidious, isn't it?
It gives me the creeps.
It implies a clinical, forced cleansing of thought. It suggests that even in a world where survival was supposedly predicated on being abnormal or eccentric, there are immediate violent movements to police how people think and behave.
Lith thought police survived the apocalypse.
Exactly. During this travelogue, Greville is forced to completely discard his apathy. The man who previously only had to worry about opening a tin of soup now has to employ every ounce of his cunning.
He has to wake up.
He's tapping into the deep manipulative skills he honed as an advertising executive, along with sheer, brutal physical violence, just to fight off hostile groups and keep Liz alive.
Okay, here is where I really want to look closely at the philosophy of the book, because there is a massive, glaring irony staring us right in the face.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right. Think about modern society for a second. Think about modern internet call-out culture, or your local neighborhood watch, or a homeowners association. We police each other's behaviors and mental states all the time, right?
Constantly.
But the core premise of Cooper's Apocalypse was that the normals died because they worshipped conformity. They loved the rules, they loved the HOAs, they loved the structure.
They needed the structure to live.
And the transnormals, the artists and madmen, survived because they were independent, divergent, free thinkers. But as soon as the old rules are gone, these bizarre religious sects, these feudal warlords, and especially these mental hygiene groups,
Yeah.
aren't they just instantly building a new, much more violent form of conformity?
They absolutely are.
They haven't escaped the need for rules at all. They've just replaced boring, bureaucratic rules with brutal, psychotic ones.
You have hit upon the exact devastating paradox that Cooper's highlighting. That is the core tragedy of the transnormals.
They didn't really escape anything.
The universe freed them from the oppression of the bank clerks and the politicians, but it could not free them from the fundamental biological human instinct to organize, to dominate, and to control their environment.
It's just hardwired into us.
Once the old structures of civilization fall, these survivors do not spontaneously generate a beautiful, liberated artistic anarchy.
No drum circles and painting under the stars.
Instead, they immediately regress to humanity's absolute most primitive state. They begin aggressively shaping a new world based not on logic, but on their own specific obsessions, paranoias, and psychoses.
So the disease of conformity wasn't actually cured by the sunspots. The disease just mutated.
That's a great way to put it.
It evolved from passive-aggressive office politics and tax codes into literal, violent tribalism.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that this section is a portrait of humanity firmly in the grip of violence and the madness of man.
The madness of man.
The new conformity isn't about ensuring you wear the correct gray suit to the bank. It's about adhering flawlessly to the psychotic, arbitrary dogma of a local warlord or a cult leader under threat of execution.
Conform or die.
Cooper is suggesting a very dark psychological truth. The drive to subjugate others, to force them to conform to your reality, is inherent to the human species. It doesn't matter if you are a highly educated accountant or a deeply traumatized eccentric. Given a vacuum of power, humans will build a hierarchy, and they will enforce it with violence.
That is such a bleak, uncompromising view of human nature. If you scrape away the thin veneer of polite civilization, you don't find noble savages living in harmony. You just find warlords waiting for their turn.
It's profoundly cynical.
And it is through surviving this exact gauntlet of viciousness, this Wanderjahr, that Greville undergoes his final, most significant transformation.
Yes, the journey changes him irreversibly. He started as a solitary, damaged man hiding from the world, completely consumed by the past.
The guy eating beans in the dark.
But through his desperate love for Liz and the sheer brutal necessity of navigating this violent new society, he is forced to adapt. Through a series of complex events, power struggles, and violent encounters during their journey, Greville does more than just survive.
He levels up.
He rises. The former advertising executive, the man who previously couldn't even manage his own guilt, is projected to the head of a large, continuously growing community of survivors.
He becomes the boss.
He finds a new, undeniable purpose as a leader. He organizes them, he strategizes, he protects them, and he provides the very thing the old world used to provide: structure.
And this is where Cooper refuses to let the reader off the hook. The ending of All Fool's Day is incredibly ambiguous.
He's not tied up with a neat bow.
There is no triumphant cinematic swell of music. There is no definitive happy ending where Greville and Liz plant crops, build a windmill, and usher in an era of peace. The source material for our deep dive explicitly states that in Cooper's conclusion, chaos is permanent.
Yes, it's permanent.
It notes that war seems to have become the highest form of politics once again. So Greville hasn't built a beautiful new utopia. He hasn't broken the wheel. He's just built a more effective army.
Which leads us directly into the novel's profound exploration of the endless cycle of violence. Any peace or stability that Greville's new community achieves is revealed to be nothing more than a temporary, highly fragile reprieve.
Just waiting for the next attack.
Exactly. They are continually threatened by other factions, other cults, other warlords who want what they have. Greville's community is not a sanctuary. It is simply a new, highly organized gear in a perpetually grinding machine of human conflict.
And that context completely colors the final line of the book. It's a very famous ending in sci-fi circles.
It's iconic.
After hundreds of pages of death, madness, trauma, and desperate survival, the novel concludes with this exact sentence. It was a fine summer morning, promising a long, warm day.
It is a masterful, chillingly understated conclusion. Think about the symmetry there. How did the novel and the apocalypse begin?
July 7th, 1971, a beautiful, quintessential English summer day, right before the psychic radiation hit.
Exactly. The final line perfectly, intentionally echoes the opening conditions of the apocalypse. It brings the entire narrative into a closed loop.
A perfect circle.
On a purely surface level, if you ignore the context, a fine summer morning implies hope. It implies a new beginning, a literal new dawn, and a long, warm day ahead for Greville, Liz, and their people to rebuild.
But contextually,
Deeply, it is a psychological threat. The last time there was a fine summer morning promising a long, warm day, 8 million people killed themselves and the world burned.
oh, that is so eerie.
The ending suggests that the cycle is simply beginning again. It is a promise of continuation, but what is continuing is the violent, unending, primitive struggle for survival in a world fundamentally governed by madness.
So how are we supposed to interpret Greville at the end? I keep going back and forth on this. Is his rise to leadership a redemption arc?
It's the big question.
Is this the story of a selfish, unlovable idiot who learns to care about someone, takes responsibility, and uses his skills to save a community? Or is it a massive tragedy? Is it the tragedy of a man who was initially freed from the crushing conformity of the old world by the sunspots, only to be forced by circumstances to become the architect of a new, equally crushing structure?
Did he conquer the apocalypse, or did he just become the new management of the asylum?
Exactly. Which one is it?
That is the central, agonizing ambiguity that literary critics have debated for decades, and I believe Cooper entirely intended it to be both simultaneously.
Both at once.
On a personal, intimate level, it is undeniably redemptive for Greville. He has found Liz, he has stepped outside his narcissistic grief, and he has found a reason to live that extends beyond his own punishment.
He's healing, in a way.
But on a broader sociological level, it is deeply, profoundly tragic. To survive, he has had to shed his transnormal independence. He's been forced to become a general, a politician, an administrator of organized violence.
He became the system.
He has had to reconstruct the very hierarchies and systems of control that the cosmic radiation supposedly destroyed in the first chapter. The unrelenting madness of the world has forced Greville to become the new definition of normal.
Wow.
And in Cooper's cynical universe, we already know exactly how dangerous and ultimately doomed normal is.
He survived the end of the world only to find himself rebuilding the exact same bomb that blew it up in the first place.
Precisely.
That is incredibly heavy. So we have this novel that is relentlessly bleak, deeply satirical, surprisingly tender and biological in the middle, and violently cyclical at the end. I want to look at the broader legacy of this book.
The reception is fascinating.
Because an author taking a baseball bat to the beloved, cozy catastrophe tropes seems like it would heavily divide audiences.
It absolutely divided audiences, and the geographic split in its reception is quite telling. Let's look at the praise first. Interestingly, it was the French literary critics who truly championed this book when the translation, Le Jour de Fou, was published.
The French loved it.
They did. The French critical establishment hailed it as a great work, unrecognized by French readers at the time of its release. They used highly evocative words like saisissant and étonnant, meaning striking and astonishing, to describe Cooper's bleak vision.
They appreciated the darkness.
The French critics were deeply appreciative of its harsh psychological realism, its philosophical weight, and its stark, uncompromising refusal to offer the reader easy answers or a comforting moral resolution.
But the reception back home in the UK and among other sci-fi purists wasn't quite as universally glowing, was it?
No, it's faced some stiff pushback.
There are some very specific criticisms leveled at the book's execution. Some readers and critics argued that the later sections of the novel, the Wanderjar, the road trip, the battles with the feudal warlords start to go off the rails.
They felt it lost its focus.
The argument is that Cooper sets up this incredibly unique, mind-bending psychological premise with the psychic sunspots and the suicide of the sensible people, but then eventually allows the narrative to devolve into a much more conventional action-adventure survival story with guys shooting at each other over territory.
Right.
Furthermore, the dialogue is frequently criticized as being highly unbelievable or stilted, and it often gets branded with a slightly dismissive, backhanded label, very English 1960s pulp fiction.
The criticisms regarding execution are certainly not unfounded. Cooper was a working writer in a very specific era, writing for a specific commercial market, and sometimes the structural scenes of that era show.
It's a product of its time.
The transition from the intensely claustrophobic, rich psychological drama of Greville and Liz in the London hideout to the broader, more exterior, action-oriented conflicts with feudal gangs can absolutely feel jarring to a modern reader.
I can see that.
And the dialogue can certainly suffer from the stylistic conventions of 1960s pulp sci-fi, where characters sometimes speak in long paragraphs of philosophical exposition or overly dramatic flair.
They sound like they're giving speeches instead of talking.
Exactly, prioritizing thematic delivery over naturalistic everyday speech. However, it is crucial that we balance these structural flaws against the sheer brilliance of the core conceptual framework.
Right, the wrapper might be a little crinkled, but we have to ask. Do the pulpy tropes and the occasionally clunky dialogue invalidate the profound philosophy inside the box?
I would argue strongly that they do not invalidate it. In fact, the 1960s context is essential to understanding both its brilliance and its shortcomings.
How so?
Think about the era Cooper was writing in. The mid to late 1960s was a period of massive, unprecedented social upheaval in Britain and globally. It was a time defined by a rising counterculture that was actively, aggressively questioning traditional authority, societal expectations, and the very definition of normalcy.
The youth were rebelling.
Cooper is tapping directly into that specific, localized societal anxiety. He is taking the unspoken fear of the establishment, the fear that the artists, the protesters, and the madmen might actually overthrow the system, and he is weaponizing it into a thought experiment.
Oh, that's brilliant.
He is asking, what if the counterculture actually won? What if the universe literally deleted the establishment?
Yeah.
The fact that he chooses to wrap this profound, heavy sociological question in an accessible, fast-paced, sometimes pulpy survival narrative is arguably the exact reason the book works as effectively as it does.
That is such a vital synthesis. I think about it this way. Sometimes the most thought-provoking concepts, the ideas that really burrow into your brain and stay there for weeks, are the ones that come wrapped in flawed, messy, pulpy packages.
Absolutely.
If Edmund Cooper had written a dry, 400-page academic treatise on the biological mechanisms of conformity and the cyclical nature of societal violence, absolutely no one outside of a university sociology department would have read it.
It would have collected dust on a shelf.
Exactly. By disguising it as a post-apocalyptic thriller where a cynical ad man fights feral dogs and cult leaders to protect his traumatized girlfriend, Cooper manages to sneak his heavy philosophy right past our defenses.
The Trojan horse method.
We come for the visceral survival story, but we leave the book questioning the absolute foundation of our own sanity.
Precisely. He utilizes the recognized, comfortable vehicle of popular genre entertainment to deliver a deeply subversive, deeply uncomfortable payload. Despite the unbelievable dialogue, or the somewhat conventional elements of the climax where Greville builds an army, the fundamental questions the novel asks about human nature remain powerfully, uncomfortably relevant today.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground in this deep dive. Let's trace the arc of this incredible, terrifying journey one more time.
Good idea.
We started on that beautiful, idyllic July morning, completely unaware of the invisible sunspots that were about to trigger the horror of the radiant suicide. We explored the cosmic judgment that systematically eliminated the sensible, the highly stable, and the conformists, the very people who kept the lights on and the trains running.
The victims of their own normalcy.
We dove into the dark psychology of survival, realizing through Matthew Greville that immunity was granted only to the deeply traumatized, those already broken by the world.
His shield of guilt.
We witnessed the mechanical, desperate, deep-sea vent of a relationship that formed between Greville and Liz in the suffocating darkness of a dead city.
A fragile connection.
And then we followed their terrifying voyage through chaos, seeing how humanity, when stripped of its bureaucratic rules, immediately and violently built new, far more brutal structures of conformity.
The madness of men taking over.
Finally, we arrived at an ambiguous, chilling future, a fine summer morning where Greville has become the new warlord, proving that war is simply politics by another name, and the cycle is doomed to repeat.
It is a narrative arc that aggressively refuses to comfort the reader at any point. It demands that we confront the darkest, most primitive aspects of our own social organizations.
It doesn't let you look away.
The enduring value of this deep dive into All Fool's Day is not merely the literary archaeology of unearthing a somewhat forgotten piece of 1960s science fiction. The value lies in how perfectly it serves as a fascinating, violently distorted lens through which to examine our own modern lives.
It holds up that distorted mirror.
It forces us to ask terrifyingly relevant questions. What behaviors do we currently consider normal? Who currently holds the power to decide what is mad? And are the rigid, predictable societal structures we rely on every single day to keep us safe actually the exact things that make us the most profoundly vulnerable when the environment shifts?
Exactly. It completely recontextualizes your daily routine. It makes you look at your morning commute, your perfectly formatted spreadsheets, your adherence to the neighborhood rules, and wonder if it's all just a symptom of a terminal disease you don't even know you have.
It's a haunting perspective.
Which brings me back to the thought we opened the show with, and a final, highly personal question I want to leave you, the listener, to really mull over on your own tonight. We talked extensively about the paradox of stability being fatal.
Right.
So, let's apply that filter to your own reality. Look around your life at your friends, your family, your coworkers. If an invisible change in the atmosphere tomorrow suddenly made complete societal conformity a fatal condition, if the universe sent a signal that instantly deleted the perfectly well-adjusted who among the people you know would be the very first to vanish?
Who goes first?
Whose absolute, unquestioning dedication to the rules would be their immediate undoing. And far more importantly, well, if survival depended entirely on being a little bit broken, a little bit eccentric, a little bit immune to the delusion of normalcy based on your own hidden quirks, your own secret obsessions, and the quiet traumas you carry with you every day, would you be one of the people left behind to inherit the chaos?